It just really is checking in. If I stop and let things be however they are, is there consciousness present? Is there awareness present? Not just that sense of aliveness, just spaciousness. Just that, simple. And it's really helpful to check into that often, to come back to that frequently. Because it's so easy to dismiss it as if it's not really all that important. It's something that's sort of in the background. I can easily ignore it and get on with more fascinating things about life, of which there are many. We've all noticed that, right? Plenty of interesting things to do. And, consciousness is willing to go along. It won't argue. It won't say, no, look at me. No, it'll be right there for you, aware of whatever you happen to be focused on. Not absent, right? But we're just not paying attention to that. Our attention is that way, and we forget all about what is actually aware of whatever the experience is. All right, so it's really helpful to make the distinction between just that unadulterated, simple, everyday, miraculous, ordinary awareness and everything else, right? Everything else arises within that. The awareness is present for whatever it is that does arise. The enjoyable things, the difficult things, the awareness is okay with it. You could say it's sort of open-hearted, right? You'd say it's present. You'd say it's attentive. It's right there for us. It's willing to have whatever experience we're having. It doesn't absent itself. It may feel like that. If something really challenging, really difficult, or really enjoyable, we may get lost in the experience and forget all about what it is that's actually noticing that we're having that experience, which is in itself enjoyable. I mean, you go to a movie, and if during the entire movie you are there saying, I am consciousness, I am watching this movie, you won't have a very good time. I mean, part of the enjoyment of going to the movie is just to forget about yourself for 2 hours, and where the attention is totally on the, whatever's happening on the screen, you forget all about yourself, you forget about, as long as you're forgetting about your awareness and consciousness, you're also forgetting about, your daily problems and, what habits you're trying to correct and everything else. So, we get pulled out of ourselves by something that is either, really difficult, really enjoyable. And life in the advertising industry is really good at sort of giving you the next thing, like, okay, that got your attention for the last 14 seconds. Now it's time to, be attentive here and then here, and you're going, oh, okay, following along, follow the bouncing ball, from one experience to the next, without a pause, really. But even while that's all happening, the awareness is present for it. We may not notice that it's present, but it's not absent. So in this spiritual journey where we're trying to cultivate consciousness, it's really not that consciousness needs to be cultivated. Consciousness is just fine, right? When we're watching the movie and totally lost in the action or the the comedic drama or whatever it is we're watching. We may be totally lost in that, forget totally about ourselves and that we're on a spiritual journey or anything. We're just totally engaged in that. But what notices the movie is consciousness. You know, our mind may be tracking the plot, but what watches the mind tracking the plot is that awareness. So even when we're totally asleep at the wheel, doing whatever, that consciousness is not absent. So it's not like we have to fabricate this consciousness or try to, hold it together. I mean, if we did, we'd really be in trouble. Let's say our heartbeat was subject to maintaining awareness of the necessity to beat our heart. That if we forgot to beat our heart for a couple minutes, there you go. None of us would be here, right? So if consciousness was subject to the same criteria, like, use it or lose it or, whatever, we would have all been lost long ago. But fortunately, it's not subject to that. It is present. Period. So this whole spiritual instructive about becoming more conscious isn't about developing a better, improved consciousness. It is really about removing or seeing through the layers that obscure our recognition of that consciousness. It's not that consciousness has to be created out of, from our own, willpower, by our own bootstraps. The consciousness is fine, fully present. Okay? But it's just really giving it, sort of redirecting it doesn't have to be every minute of every day, but just sort of giving recognition to it. It's sort of an honoring of it. It's like the recognition, well, without that consciousness, what would I be? Just a mechanical, stimulus and response kind of being? I mean, would that be what my entire life would be? Or is it consciousness that really gives us our abilities as humans, and maybe other animals have it as well, to self-reflect and to be appreciative of being able to be present in and witness to this creation. Right? If it's just stimulus and response, this stimulus gets this reaction, positive reaction, don't want that, want this. If it's only that kind of life, then it's pretty limited. But the idea that we can step back and look at that is quite amazing. You look at animals, I mean, there's no doubt that there's consciousness happening there. What's not clear that's happening in animals that is clear that's happening in humans is the ability to look back at ourselves, to use that consciousness to self-reflect. Unfortunately, when we do that, we almost turn it against ourselves and say, whatever we tell ourselves in our head, you could have done that better, you did it wrong, you're not good enough, you're unworthy, whatever the story is. Rather than recognizing sort of the self-recognition of what's happening is actually quite extraordinary. Here I am, what appears to be a separate body, walking around in the world, an actor in whatever I'm doing every day, and yet at the same time, this sense of watching that I am the actor going about my business every day. Because sometimes it feels more like one, and sometimes it feels more like the other. But often that ability to self-reflect gets corrupted by sort of using our mental abilities, as in a managerial, disciplinary kind of way, where we turn it against ourselves and, indulge in self-judgment or blame or regret, and all of those feelings that just sap our energy, and also remove us from whatever may be happening at that moment, because it pulls us away. It pulls us into this mental construction that may not have anything at all to do with what's happening at that moment. Yeah. So it's not that there's any issue with the consciousness. It's that often that sense of spacious awareness, more global view, broader perspective, gets buried in this mental activity that's often not productive. I mean, it can be productive, that's wonderful, but so often there's this repetitive quality to it, where we have the same thoughts or the same pattern of thoughts literally year after year, and they go around, judgmental thoughts, unforgiving thoughts about other people, something that happened years ago that we're just not willing to let go, and we just hang on. And any one of those ways that we we sort of hang our hat on that. I know it's true, that person shouldn't have done it, they were wrong, and then we hold on to that belief or that thought, and just one of those thoughts is sufficient to hold our attention, right? Because we come back to it again and again. If we ever begin to experience a little more spaciousness, a little more room, a little more peace, a little more quiet, so often, the mind will jump in and say, yeah, but what about so-and-so? They hurt you. So it's a way that the mind can just pull our attention back into something and away from this broader view. So one of the ways that, meditation can be seen as sort of a medicinal thing, like I'm going to meditate and that'll make me more peaceful and quiet, and I'll sort of get more centered and grounded, and then I can go back to work. I can go back about my daily life. So we can use it as in that way, sort of therapeutically. Feeling a little down, a little out of sorts, I'll meditate, then I'll feel better, grounded. I'll go back out into the fray, right? So we can use it, and that's fine. I mean, there's proven physiological benefits of sitting quietly. But and that's great. And in the long run, one of the really useful things about sitting quietly is we get to see how our mind works. There's ample opportunity to do that. We might not like watching how the mind works, especially if we think it shouldn't be doing that, right? When we sit down quietly, it's like, okay, now it's time to be peaceful and happy. And the mind thinks, now's my chance, It's playtime, And so, I mean, that becomes the experience. And then we think, well, that's not right. That's not what's supposed to be happening. I'm doing it wrong, And then we can develop a story about that. Or we can try to, do it. I'm in control here. Quiet. I'm trying to be happy. And so we go to war within our own minds, and somehow we think peace will result. But we can just see, okay, there's the mind playing, both sides of the chessboard. It thinks that it's, one of them is, holding the higher ground. That's my true self up there. True self telling my other self what to do, right? But it's just, it's some old parental voice, like, this is what's best, this is what I should be doing. We don't need parents anymore, we can do it to ourselves. So. Look, Ma, I can do it myself. So we can just see these old voices in our head that we picked up along the way, and just see them at that. If you oppose them, you energize them. Anybody have that experience? You try to stop a thought. Maybe a story that hasn't been resolved that you're not entirely comfortable with. Maybe something that happened that day or something that happened a long time ago. And you really don't want to think about it. And you can sort of suppress it for a while. TV, alcohol, busyness, they all work, for a certain length of time. But, in the meantime, it's still there, just waiting for your guard to be down. Go home late at night, a little tired. It all comes rushing back. So we can't, the idea of just not, forcibly not thinking about something, or, not allowing something to be present in our experience, just reinforces it, just energizes it. We can hold it down for a long time, maybe, years. But we know that it's hiding down there. We know it's lurking in the basement somewhere. And so we don't want to open that door, but we're aware that it's there, right? And the only way to resolve that, well, there's two ways. One is to suffer with that sort of quiet or deep-seated anxiety for the rest of your life. That's one option. The other option is to actually allow it to arise. So just what we did at the beginning, where, whatever happens to be present in our experience, physically, mentally, emotionally, just allow it to be there. That we have the power to do. We won't be able to control the experience, but we can control our willingness to be present for it. And that has transformative power in some mysterious way. Just to be present for it. Not to analyze it to death, not to fix it, not to decide that the other person was really the one to blame. It's not to come up with a better ending to an old story, decide how you were right and they weren't. None of that. It's just allowing it to be seen, almost like you were watching a movie. It's arising. You can replay it just see it in the raw, unedited form. Just being willing to do that. That's actually the only thing that's needed, to allow it to be seen. Once it's allowed to be seen, it, whatever it is, loses its capacity to scare us, I guess you could say. It's just if we're uncomfortable about something and we're trying to ignore it, we've empowered it, we've buried it, but we still know it's there. What changes that is like, okay, I'll look at it. Allow it to be. Just like we did at the beginning, whatever that sensation is, it arises in our consciousness, we let it be there, again, without trying to manage it, fix it, make it go away. Just allow it to be seen. Just the light of day of consciousness. Allow it to be fully present. The awareness won't be there forever, and it may not be pretty to see. And you can't even take the attitude, well, I'm going to look at it because I want it to go away. You have to just be willing to look at it, period. You know, it can't be a strategy to make it go away, because then you're still holding some opposition, like this shouldn't be and I just want to be done with it. No, you really have to, you know, it might take a little time. So you have to really allow it to be there. So one of the useful things about meditation, like I said, it gives us an opportunity to look at the sort of mechanism of our mind. Not the parts of our mind, our mental activities that are functional, useful, working well. That's not really a problem. You know, we don't sit around agonizing at night like, you know, I wonder why my mind functions so logically and clearly today. We don't worry about that. That's not a problem. Okay, it's about, you know, when something feels uncomfortable, you know, and just sort of grinds on us, or, you know, it doesn't ever seem to be resolved, or we make some self-judgment. Those sticky thoughts, right? Those are the ones that I'm talking about. So when we sit down to meditate, a lot of times that the mind almost thinks, okay, this is my time. I can bring up things that, you know, maybe have been ignored or repressed for a while. So it can be a surprise to see that, you know, especially if we had the expectation it was going to be peaceful and joyful, and, you know, it can sometimes be that, but then sometimes it can be pretty raw, actually. Anybody experience that? You know, you sit down and meditate and it's not all peace and love and joy. It's maybe some things come up that we really didn't want to come up. But again, that's the opportunity. And my sense of it is when those things arise, especially things that have been buried for a long time, it's really the body's wisdom saying, I think you can handle this now. Right? You know, it's been stored somewhere in the body, some memory, some feeling, you know, it's usually some contraction somewhere. You know, it's, okay, maybe now there's the maturity there to allow that to really be seen for what it was. So when we can begin to allow that, then it's possible to see that, just like we did at the beginning, that there's the allowance of whatever arises, and then there's something that notices that, whatever object within consciousness is there, there's something that notices that. So we begin to see that whatever arises, there's also the spaciousness within which things arise. So we can begin to notice that more. It's really stepping back just a little bit from being totally caught in the mental turmoil. Right? If the mind can see the mental turmoil, like even to say, oh, my mind's really busy, what is it that notices that the mind is really busy? It's not the busy mind. The busy mind's totally occupied in being busy. It's actually our awareness that recognizes, oh, okay, Right now, the mind is busy. But by recognizing that, we've sort of created a little daylight between that mental turmoil and something else that's present, right? So there can be a little relaxation about the busy mind. If you're totally stuck in the busy mind, and to add to the turmoil, we say to ourselves, I've got to stop this. This is awful. I really don't like it. It shouldn't be happening. I'm supposed to be meditating. This is peaceful. Where's the peace? This isn't working, right? Okay. So the mind may still be saying all of that, but while it's saying all that, we could say, yep, that's what it's doing right now. And there's a little relaxation about it. It's not a strategy. It's actually what's happening. There's something, if we notice that our mind is busy, there's something other than a busy mind that notices it. That's helpful information. So this is, when we talk about meditation or silent sitting, we can think of it as sort of a spectrum, or I don't really want to say progression, but there's a greater and greater sort of stepping back. And so one of the first ways that we can work with the mind is just to be mindful of the activity in the mind. So it just means paying attention to whatever's happening in the mind. Yeah. So that's a good first step. Then there can be a slight stepping back, like we're talking about, where there's saying, okay, it seems like there's a witness. There's something that notices the activity in the mind. And at first it can feel like an entity, right? The witness, right? Right now I'm being the witness. Okay? So that's helpful. It gives us a little bit of separation from what's happening in the mind. And after a while of this kind of practice, where we sort of park our point of reference a little bit prior to the activity in the mind, we can become curious. Well, I wonder if it's actually an entity there, like my higher self, or is it more true to say that it feels like witnessing? There's noticing happening, but I can't quite pinpoint a entity in there somewhere. There's not, it's not my spiritual self, it's not my higher self, but there is undeniably this sense of noticing, of witnessing. So we go from, sort of a point of fixation, this witness that can be helpful, to stepping back a bit further and feeling like there's clearly a sense of witnessing, but I can't quite put my finger on the point of origin. Does that make sense? We can't quite say, oh, yeah, this is me, right? So there's this undeniable sense of noticing, witnessing, being aware of what's happening. You could call it a sense of presence, just like we're all present right now. And this practice of allowing whatever does arise to be as it is sort of removes us from excessively engaging in things. So this is where attraction and aversion come in. So it's the two ways that we get hooked, so to speak. If we're sitting there and we're feeling pretty peaceful and we have a thought that is a really pleasant thought. I used to do that on retreats. It was like I'd work, and then go on retreats, and then my mind would think, oh, this is an opportunity to think creative thoughts. It was great. So I would imagine, oh, it's wonderful, So we can get hooked on things that sort of, pull us into a daydream, and it can be quite pleasant. And, 20 minutes can go by, and think, oh, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be aware. Or, the other thing can happen is we can, sense that there's something lurking in the shadows there and go, get fearful about that and run away in the other direction. So aversion, attraction, those are two ways that we can get pulled into that mental sphere. But again, the way to work with that is to see, maybe we won't see it the moment it arises, but we can see it, I've just been lost for 20 minutes, and, there I got pulled into this fantasy. But what most people do is sort of self-flagellate at that point, like, oh, I'm a terrible meditator, I can't ever do this, why can't I get it right? But that's sort of like, beating your dog after he's come home. If you want your dog to come home, you don't want to beat him when he comes home. You should be, the more useful response when we get lost in meditation, go off in a daydream somewhere, and we finally come back, is to be grateful, right? Well, at least I came back, You look around, there are a lot of people walking around out there that have never come back. So 20 minutes isn't bad. Wow, it's only 20 minutes, great. It could have been the rest of my life. So that's a little more stepping back, where by allowing what does arise to arise, it begins to lose its power to pull us away. The other thing that's really helpful is if we really get that what is being sought isn't going to be found in the mind. Right? As long as we believe that there's some thought out there, maybe I haven't thought it yet, but there's some thought that will be the key that unlocks everything. As long as we believe that that's the route to salvation, some magical thought that'll resolve everything, we'll still be very attentive to the mind, like maybe it's down that road. How about I've got to be on the lookout here, I've got to stay in that, following the mind, like the mind will tell me when it's on the right track or not. And we can let that be as it is. Right? The mind likes to stay in control. The mind doesn't like what we're doing here. The mind doesn't like to be told that there is a way of being in which the mind isn't the final judge and jury. It's not the final arbiter of what's real. It likes to think it is. We've been taught that it is. So it doesn't like to be dislodged from that position. But this journey is to come more fully in the recognition of what is actually living this life. And what's living this life isn't limited to our mental construct of what's happening. Fortunately, right? It feels like we'd be giving up an awful lot if we sort of, were willing if we convinced the mind that it wasn't really in charge, then where would we be? That's the underlying fear in this game. So there's the pull towards a deeper recognition of ourselves. I know there's something deeper in here that maybe hasn't been fully realized yet. There's that pull, and then there's that, but what would I be if I gave up this belief in myself as a separate self? Mind firmly in control. I put a lot of effort into that. Not so sure I want to give it up. So if we're really honest with ourselves on a spiritual journey, you can feel both sides. You can feel this pull, and you can feel this hesitation. Because the pull is irrational. There's no logical reason. If you met somebody on the street and told them that, what you're what you're doing with your life right now is to find who you are prior to the mind, they'd look at you funny. They would, because it's that sense of having built up the structure of a personal self. We've all spent, our whole lifetime sort of creating it, and when we really look at it, there's a hesitancy to give up that identity. For what? We don't know, right? We don't know. That's the, when people talk about fear, as you get sort of closer to what is really true and things get stripped away more and more, there can be this sense of fear of this loss of identity. It feels like it's really, really valuable, and you're not so sure you want to give it up. And it's good to recognize that, actually. It's actually helpful to recognize that there's both this pull and this hesitancy. Anybody feel that? Yeah. Because the very real question is, who would I be if this sense of being the final authority on my life I find out isn't actually true? It feels like we're giving up something of great value because we've spent our whole lifetime creating it. And we can't just say, well, no, I've heard it's really spiritually advantageous to be egoless, so that's what I'm going to do. Everybody get the irony of that? I'm going to be egoless because it'll really be to my advantage. And I hope the payoff's really good. I've heard a lot about it, and I hope they're right. So it's not something that we willingly do. We don't willingly step out of that identity. It's just seeing that the identity is actually created by our beliefs. Beliefs in what we are is limited to our story, our concepts, our situation, our age, our gender, our health, our wealth, our whole package. And that's who we are. That's the belief. So as we're going down this meditative path and we're just stepping back, like we said before, there's the sense of the observing, witnessing, noticing the objects of consciousness. Nice duality, right? Consciousness and everything else. Okay. And then at first it feels like this consciousness is somehow generated by this body-mind. It seems somehow personal. Seems somehow like it's my consciousness, right? Even when we encounter it, even when we sense into it, it feels like, no, it's here. You know, maybe not exactly here, but it's sort of here, you know? It's not like I don't sense it as being primarily over there. You know, it's looking at the world out through these eyeballs, etc. So it feels like it's in this vicinity, and it's this body-mind does sense into the world through this body. I mean, it's, you know, without this sensing organism, how would we actually experience this world at all? So at first it seems like this awareness is somehow personal, my awareness. And I'm caught up into my personal story. Sometimes I can relax into my personal awareness. That's the movement back and forth, right? And then a really useful inquiry is, I wonder if this awareness is really my awareness, or is it just awareness? Is it really personal, generated here, or is it something other than an outcome of this body-mind? Is there something, do I know that for sure? You know? And the idea isn't to come up with the right philosophical answers, really to sense into that more and more, maybe over a few years even, just really to sense into that. Like can I say for sure that this awareness is something that is generated here? Or is it possible that it's bigger than that? Is it possible that what I sense is awareness here is actually no different and in fact inseparable from what John experiences there? Can I say that for sure? So that becomes a useful inquiry. So now when we sit down to meditate, then there's a question, well, what's actually meditating here? You know, before it was me, the witness, witnessing my stuff. And then it was like, well, witnessing's happening. Not quite sure what that is, but it's happening, I know that. And there's my stuff. And then there's just a sense of consciousness that seems to be there every time I check in. Slow down enough to check in and say, "Yep, it's still there." And then it's like, well, I wonder what that awareness really is. You know, now we've stepped back a ways. It's actually one of the fundamental questions in spirituality is whether this consciousness is a function of our brain cells or if it is indeed something of a different dimension, something that's actually present for this life, but in another sense actually beyond the limitations of form. Because it is formless, right? Can't quite see it, touch it, taste it, feel it. We can have the sensation of being it, that sensation of noticing, but we can't step back and look at it as an object. Right? You see the impossibility of that? If it's what's looking, how can you step back and look at what's looking? You can play some sort of conceptual mind games, but the reality of it is, if you're looking, aware, present, the whole idea of, being conscious of consciousness, and really just consciousness, it's just like, yeah. So as we step back, if we sense into that awareness may be bigger than what I imagined it to be, from that perspective, the personal issues, all the things that we're trying to improve and work out, look different. And it's from that perspective, it's actually not necessary to resolve all of that. It's not that we get there by resolving all of that. It's noticing that what is there, present, conscious, is already there. It's already complete. But we think, well, that can't be how it works. It only seems fair that we should have to, work something, earn it somehow. Let that thought be as it is. We don't know that that's actually true, right? We think, based on, how things normally work in the world, you get rewarded for certain behavior. So it's easy to buy into the same concept when it comes to spirituality. But one of the main reasons that people miss awakening is that we look for it where it's not. We look for it in some future event that I know will be wonderful and mind-blowing. And after, I fix a few things here. Then maybe. But not here and not now. Right? Isn't that the belief? 30 years of meditation minimum. Maybe there's a cave in your future somewhere. Just stories. And we miss it because it's like, oh, it's not here. But what if that wasn't true? Just a belief, right? Power of belief. We believe something's true. We believe anything. We believe that the world is a scary place, and the world will appear as a scary place. And the world is more than happy to present itself in that way. You think the world's a scary place? Okay. It's the power of our belief. So if we firmly believe, buy into the story that it can't be here, it can't be now, it can't be me, not me. Well, maybe if I did these other things, then maybe, okay. But not now, not here. So we've through a power belief, we've denied discovering what we already are in the only place that we will ever discover it, which is here and now. Like, for example, right now. Nothing is actually lacking. Other than our insistence that it is. That's it. This whole sense of that's, sort of subtle or not so subtle, deep-seated sense of separation from the whole, separation from the divine, separation from God, however you want to phrase it, that whole sense is founded on a belief. That what I am is separate. How do I find my way out of that maze? How do I improve my way out of that? Simple misunderstanding. Culturally acceptable, still a misunderstanding. That's as bad as it gets. Belief in something that's not fundamentally true. And you can just sense the mind coming back in and saying, okay, that sounds pretty good, but... So you let the mind do that. Knowing this, you won't convince the mind. The mind will eventually settle down and, sort of, but don't ever presume that it's totally surrendered. It's very subtle. So we can just, see that. That's what the mind, we've trained it well. We've trained it to step in to every situation, no matter what. We believe what it tells us. And in this arena, it doesn't work. The reason it doesn't work is that the entirety of existence isn't subject to being reduced to a conception. And the mind, when you listen to the mind talks to itself in sentences, phrases, right? Everybody's mind does that. Those are all conceptual thought patterns. So just by definition, this is just, this isn't deep philosophy. This is just simple, logical, that a conception can't be the whole. The whole will always be greater than whatever conception we create about it. So that doesn't limit our ability to live from that awareness, as that awareness. But it won't ever be able to be reduced to a concept. It's bigger than that. So we can just see it won't be found in the mind. The mind won't be happy about this. The mind will always come back in and say, yes, but, was that really, did you really realize that? Is it really consciousness? Is it, anybody have that sense? Like, you have a profound experience and then the mind comes in, that couldn't be it. I've heard it's better than that. It'll have an objection. And we can just see. It's not like we have to punish the mind or try to make it go away. We can just say, oh, there's the mind again doing what it does. Not a problem. And in the meantime, we can sense into, yes, and this awareness is aware of the mind coming in and saying what it says, and everything's okay. Already. Actually is. Imagine that.